The palace never truly slept. Even at night, there were footsteps, faint, careful, moving through candlelight like ghosts in silk. And on that night, the night no one marked on any royal calendar, the footsteps came from a young queen's chamber. She moved quietly, though not out of fear. She was laughing, not loud, just a breathy giggle beneath her breath. The kind girls share when they think no one's watching. Her name was Catherine Howard. She was 17, or 18. History doesn't agree, because Catherine Howard was never meant to be remembered clearly, only quietly, as a warning, or a whisper. Outside, the wind pulled at the trees of Hampton Court. Inside, the fire crackled low. She passed guards who didn't look her in the eye. She passed walls covered in tapestries too thick to let in sound. And she moved, not like a queen, but like a girl playing queen. Because she still was. Catherine had come to court not as a royal, but as a lady, a cousin of Anne Boleyn, another Howard girl. She wasn't educated like a princess. She didn't speak Latin, didn't write poetry, but she knew how to smile, how to charm, how to fill a room with warmth and color and light. And in a court ruled by fear, that was dangerous, because the king noticed. Henry VIII was no longer the man people remembered from his portraits. He was older, heavier, his leg pained him constantly. He moved slowly, breathed loudly, but he still ruled. And when he saw Catherine, young, blooming, untouched by the shadows of his past, he felt something flicker. Not just desire, but nostalgia. He saw in her not just a wife, but youth itself. And Catherine, she smiled, she curtsied, she said yes, because you do not say no to the king. The wedding came quickly. There was music, dancing, banquets. She wore a dress the color of crushed roses. People called her the rose without a thorn. They meant it kindly, but the thorns were there. They just hadn't drawn blood yet. At first, Catherine enjoyed court life. She loved dresses, jewels, the way the sun hit the gold thread on her sleeves. She loved the attention, and the king gave her everything. He called her his rose, his sweetheart, his jewel, and for a time, she smiled back. But behind the walls, things were different. There were secrets, quiet names passed between servants, old letters hidden in drawers, and people who remembered who Catherine had been before the crown. Not a queen, but a girl, living in a chaotic household, surrounded by other young people, some of whom had gotten too close. When you become queen, your past doesn't vanish. It follows you, softly, step by step, like a shadow at your heels. And Catherine's shadow had names. Francis Derham, Thomas Culpeper, one, from before, one, perhaps, during. It didn't matter which was which. Not to those who whispered. Not to those who watched. One day, someone slipped a note beneath the king's chamber door. No one knows who. The note spoke of letters, and locked doors, and things not meant for queens. The king went pale. He did not shout. He simply stopped smiling. Catherine didn't know at first. She danced that evening, laughed with her ladies, tried on pearls, but the music in the hall grew quieter. People turned when she passed. The warmth began to fade. And then, she was told that she was no longer permitted to see the king. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not again. They moved her to another room. No longer her chamber, not a prison, not yet. But the windows were smaller, and the doors closed harder behind her. She asked what was happening. The guards didn't answer. She wrote a letter to the king. No reply. She sent messages to her uncle. None came back. And when she tried to leave the room, the lock clicked softly. There is a particular kind of fear that grows not from noise, but from the absence of it. And Catherine, once the laughing girl, grew still. Her ladies wept. She did not yet, because part of her still believed this was a misunderstanding, a rumor, a mistake. She asked to speak to Henry, to explain, to see him, to look him in the eyes and remind him of who she was. They told her no. She asked again, and finally, someone said yes. But it was not a meeting. It was a trap. They said she could walk to the chapel, that the king might be there, that he might listen. She dressed carefully, not in royal purple, but in pale blue, something soft, something gentle, and she walked barefoot through the corridors of Hampton Court. She passed tapestries that no longer shimmered, chandeliers that no longer sparkled, and when she reached the chapel door, she saw guards, not priests, and they told her to turn around. He would not see her. Not now, not ever. That night, the palace was quiet, but not peacefully. It was the quiet of a house holding its breath. And somewhere in the darkness, Catherine Howard sat on the edge of her bed, realizing that the music was gone, and the crown on her head was not enough to save her. Before she was queen, before the silks, before the crown, Catherine Howard was just a girl in a house full of girls. A house that was grand on the outside, part of the mighty Howard name, but hollow and messy within. A place where children were sent to be watched, but not truly seen. The Duchess of Norfolk's household was where noble blood went to wait. To be polished, prepared, but not protected. Catherine's mother had died when she was young. Her father, a younger son with little land and less ambition, was distant. Often abroad, often not mentioned. So Catherine was placed, as many girls were, into the care of relatives. The kind of care that keeps you dressed, fed, and completely unsupervised. The nursery wing was chaotic. Dozens of young people, noble by name, not by conduct, all vying for attention, affection, or simply a warm place to sit. They shared beds, shared books, shared secrets. There were no locked doors, no strict rules. The Duchess was old and tired. She ruled with distance and servants. Catherine learned to rule with charm. She was beautiful from the beginning, not in the sculpted, silent way portraits like to imagine, but in a wild, bright way. Her laugh could turn a scolding into a joke. Her eyes could make a maid forget why she was angry. She didn't read much, didn't write often, but she listened, and when she walked into a room, the room noticed. There were boys, always. They were everywhere, sons of noblemen, servants in livery, tutors, musicians. And in a house like this, lines blurred quickly, evenings blurred more. Catherine didn't think of danger. She thought of music, of dancing, of stolen notes passed under doors, of whispers in candlelight. Francis Derham was one of the first. Not handsome, but older, confident, charming. He worked in the household, a sort of secretary, a sort of nothing, but he had eyes for Catherine. And she did not look away. Their relationship was not secret, but it was not formal. They laughed too loudly in corners, passed gifts, sometimes kissed, sometimes more. In the dim rooms of a half-forgotten house, they played at adulthood, not knowing that someone, someday, would call those moments crimes. Later, when she wore a crown, they would ask her, "Did you give him promises? Did you write your name beside his? Did you call him husband?" She would say, "We were young. I was foolish. I did not know." And she meant it, because no one had told her what was allowed, what mattered, what would come back. After Derham, there were others. Some short moments, some longer. The household moved. Catherine grew, not older, just taller, more visible, more practiced at walking in shoes too tight, more skilled at saying what people wanted to hear. She learned that being wanted was a kind of safety, until it wasn't. She was sent to court as a lady-in-waiting, not for any great skill, not for her virtue, but for her name, and her smile. Anne of Cleves had just married Henry VIII, the fourth queen in a line that already felt cursed. Catherine arrived as part of the background, and quickly became the foreground. Henry noticed. Everyone noticed. The king, now swollen with age and pain, watched this bright girl move through the halls like a candle flickering against the grey. She curtsied lower than the others. Her eyes lingered just a moment longer, not because she calculated, because she had always survived this way, and the court mistook survival for seduction. Soon, the music changed. Anne of Cleves was set aside. Quietly, formally, and Catherine, barely 19, was placed in her stead. As if a dress being swapped. As if a chair at dinner being pulled back and offered again. She did not protest. She did not rejoice. She simply accepted. Because what else was there? Saying no was not an option. And saying yes was what she had been trained for all along. But she was not trained to rule. Not trained to be still. Not trained to be watched at every hour. She was trained to be liked. To be adored. To move. To breathe. And queens are not meant to move freely. She filled her chamber with light. With music. With laughter. With girls who reminded her of home. And some who reminded her of Francis Derham. He found his way back. Through letters. Through servants. And eventually, through the doors of the court itself. She gave him work. Perhaps out of guilt. Perhaps fear. Perhaps both. But she did not send him away. And that was enough. Later, Thomas Culpeper came. A courtier. Younger. Handsome. With eyes that lingered a little too long. And Catherine was still young. Still hopeful. Still someone who did not understand what being queen truly meant. That nothing was secret. That every word, every glance, every breath would be remembered. By someone, somewhere. When the whispers started, she didn't believe them. She had heard whispers her whole life. They always passed, until they didn't, until one landed on the king's desk. Written, signed, and deadly. But that is not now. That is later. Tonight, we let her remain a girl. Just a girl in a cold house. A house filled with laughter and shadows. Where no one taught her where the walls were. Only how to smile, and curtsy, and survive. Until the day, when all of that was no longer enough. Catherine didn't dream of being queen. She dreamed of music, of gowns with pearls, of whispers in gardens, of letters hidden beneath pillows. She dreamed of being loved, or at least adored. But not like this, not from him. Henry VIII was no longer the golden prince of early portraits. He was in pain, heavy, tired, a king whose youth had been traded away for power. And for wives, one gone in childbirth, one exiled, one executed, one divorced. The throne beside him had been filled and emptied too many times. But he still believed in love. Or at least in the illusion of it. And when Catherine Howard smiled at him, bright, naive, uncomplicated, he saw something that warmed the corners of his memory. Not lust, not politics, but the distant echo of joy. At court, everyone felt the shift. Anne of Cleves had been queen for just a few months. Chosen from a portrait. Dismissed after one awkward meeting. She was too plain, he said, too quiet, too different, but she was kind, and clever, and knew when to leave. Catherine arrived as her maid of honor. And within weeks, Henry's eyes never left her. The court whispered. They always did, but no one dared speak too loudly. Because the king was smiling again. He laughed more, he gave gifts, he praised Catherine endlessly, her sweetness, her youth, her music, her freshness, a word they all understood. And feared, because that word had power. And that power, once held, was nearly impossible to escape. Catherine didn't ask to be queen. But she didn't say no. She wouldn't have been allowed. And she didn't want to disappoint. She had always been good at pleasing others. So when the king gave her pearls, she wore them. When he wrote her poems, she read them aloud to her ladies. When he proposed, privately, with the air of a man offering salvation, she curtsied low. And said yes, because saying yes was what girls like her had been raised to do. The wedding was quiet by royal standards. Held in a private chapel. Few guests, few witnesses. But the king wept. He called her his rose. His light. His gift from God. And Catherine smiled. Because that's what she was supposed to do. Because that's what everyone expected. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted to believe it too. As queen, she was showered with gifts. Dresses. Rings. A new motto. No other wool but his. She was not crowned, like Anne Boleyn. but she was adored. The king showed her off like a jewel. Even when his leg ached, even when he needed help to walk, he held her hand like it healed him, and she walked beside him, graceful and composed. But inside, she was still the girl from the Howard household, still unsure where to stand, still trying to remember everyone's names, still wondering if her smile was wide enough, or too wide. In private, Henry called her, "my rose without a thorn." He said she had restored his youth. He said she made him believe in happiness again. And Catherine listened, nodded, laughed, but said little, because what does a teenage queen say to a king who has buried wives? To a man 3 decades older? To a husband who can give her everything, and take everything away? The court adjusted. Some were pleased, some cautious, some already preparing for the next chapter, because nothing at Henry's court lasted. Not favor, not fortune, not wives. But for a few months, Catherine danced. She revived courtly entertainment, music, masks, banquets. She brought youth back to the palace, and Henry basked in it. He did not join the dancing, but he watched, always, with a smile that was part affection, part possession. Catherine tried to be the queen they wanted. She wrote letters, she attended services, she gave coins to the poor. She smiled during long ceremonies. She endured the weight of a crown that never quite fit. But she missed being unobserved. She missed the freedom of being no one, of wandering corridors without being followed, of speaking without being quoted. She missed friends, and letters, and the soft chaos of girlhood. But she never said so. Because queens do not complain. They perform. And Catherine had always been a good performer. Still, shadows began to gather, not from her, but from those who remembered who she had been. Frances Dereham, gone, but not forgotten, a name whispered by servants, by rivals, by those with letters in their pockets. And Thomas Culpeper, handsome, confident, always near, too near. They exchanged notes, shared glances, walked alone, once, twice, too many times. Nothing dramatic. Nothing confirmed, just enough to draw eyes, enough to raise eyebrows, enough to write about. And someone did. The king didn't notice at first. He was busy writing love letters to his wife, boasting of how she made him feel whole again, how her youth was a blessing, a miracle, a healing balm for his weary soul. But others noticed, and when they spoke, they did not whisper. It started with a small inquiry. Nothing formal. Just questions, just routine checks. But it was never just routine. Not at Henry's court. Every question had an answer prepared before it was asked. Every letter had already been read. Every word already judged. And the quiet joy that had filled the palace began to thin. Catherine noticed. Her ladies changed their tone. The guards outside her chamber stood more rigidly. There were fewer jokes, fewer invitations. And one day, she was told the king would not be dining with her. Not that night, not the next, not again. She asked why. No one answered. She asked to see him. They said he was indisposed. She asked again. The answer became silence. And silence is where fear begins to grow. But she still hoped. Because she was still young. Because she still believed in apologies. In explanations. In words fixing things. She had fixed many things before, with a look, with a smile, with charm. Why should this be different? She didn't understand that she had crossed an invisible line, that charm had limits, that crowns come with traps, and that once the king stops smiling, it is already too late. But for a few days more, she remained queen, in title, in name, and she walked the palace halls like they were still hers, with quiet grace, with distant hope, with the fragile dignity of a girl who said yes, because she never knew she could say no. Catherine Howard loved music. She loved the way it filled the space between things, between awkward silences, between long processions, between duties she didn't understand. So she filled the court with it. Musicians were summoned daily. Dancers performed in great halls where stone had long forgotten rhythm. Masks were staged, with masks of gold and velvet. It was a court of celebration, of sound, of youth, and for a time, no one complained. The king watched from the sidelines, his leg too painful for movement. But his eyes followed her wherever she went. She was his joy, his second chance, and he basked in her brightness. But others began to squint, because brightness attracts attention, and attention, at court, is always dangerous. Catherine did not rule with command. She ruled with charm. She did not issue orders. She inspired gifts. She did not assert control. She danced. She smiled. She made people feel warm, and in return, they gave her space, and deference, and silence. But that silence was not always safe. Some admired her, others resented her, many underestimated her, and one or two began to listen too closely. Thomas Culpeper was young, well-dressed, well-liked. He had served the king. He had served other queens. And he was often nearby. Too nearby. He spoke softly, moved confidently, and looked at Catherine the way a man looks when he forgets where he is. And Catherine, perhaps, forgot too, or wanted to, or pretended to. We'll never know. They met, we think, not often, not openly, but enough, perhaps in galleries, or gardens, or behind closed doors after the palace had grown still. They spoke, laughed, traded words that, in another life, would have meant little, but here, each syllable was a weight, each glance, a wedge. Because queens are not allowed private thoughts, much less private visitors. And there was Francis Derham, the boy from before. He had returned to court, at her request, as a servant. But servants have memories. He remembered the letters, the promises, the soft candlelight, and perhaps, he thought it was love. Perhaps, he thought he still had power. And he spoke too freely. The palace, so recently filled with music, began to shift, not loudly, but gradually. People stopped smiling when she passed. The pages grew stiffer, the messengers slower, and one day, her rooms were searched, softly, efficiently, and a letter was found. Folded, hidden, but real, signed, yours, until death. And the quiet began to break. Catherine noticed. Of course she did. She was not stupid. She had survived too many drawing rooms. She saw the glances, felt the shift. She tried to speak to the king, to explain, to ask, but the answer was distance. Not from him directly, but from the court, from the air. And one morning, the door to her chamber did not open. She was told to stay, that she was not well, that the king needed rest, that things were being discussed. She waited, all day, all night, and the next day too. No news, no visitors, no letters, only food brought by silent hands, and eyes that no longer met hers. Then came the knock, soft, careful. They told her she was being questioned. She asked, about what? They didn't answer, just led her through cold halls into a room with no windows, where men in dark clothes asked her questions she didn't fully understand. Dates, names, rooms, letters. She stumbled, hesitated, remembered too little, or too much. And with every answer, the wall rose higher. She asked to see the king, to speak with him, to explain. They said no. She asked again, and again. They said nothing. They removed her titles, her jewels, her motto. They told her she was no longer queen, not wife, not Rose, not even lady, just Catherine Howard, daughter of a lesser son, a girl who had forgotten her place, and now would remember it, alone. She was sent to Sion Abbey, a quiet house turned silent cell, not a prison, but not a home, just walls, and within them, a girl with too many memories, and not enough air. She still believed, for a while, that the king might forgive her, that the man who had once called her his rose without a thorn might remember what he had seen in her eyes. But the king was quiet, too quiet, because betrayal, when it comes from beauty, is colder than treason, and Henry could not look at her anymore. not because she had failed him, but because she had reminded him he was old and broken, and no longer enough. There was no grand betrayal, no armies, no daggers, no cries in the hallway. There was only paper, faded, folded, stained slightly with wax, and words, not loud, not cruel, just soft. Too soft, but soft words, when caught at the wrong time, become blades sharper than steel. And this one had Catherine's name on it. It wasn't a confession, not in the way they wanted, but it was close. A letter, believed to be in her hand, sent to Thomas Culpeper. It said little, a few lines, a gentle phrase, yours, as long as life shall last. But the signature was clear, and in a court where silence could be punished. Words were fatal. The letter was shown to the king. He read it, once, then again, and for the first time in many months, he did not speak. He stood up, walked to the window, and stared. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the wind. Inside, the air did not move. The silence in the palace grew heavy. Rooms that once echoed with music fell still. Tapestries hung limp against stone. Even the courtiers whispered less, because they knew that something had shifted, that the woman they had bowed to yesterday was now a name written on parchment in the past tense. Catherine, at Sion Abbey, waited. She still hoped, still imagined explanations, still believed in the power of honesty. She thought, if I tell the truth, it will be enough. But the truth, as she knew it, was not the truth they wanted. So when the questions came, sharp, repeated, overlapping, she did her best. She spoke of Dereham, of long-ago days in the Duchess's house, of foolish moments, of youthful mistakes. She admitted more than she remembered, because memory, when pressed, bends. They asked her if she had loved him. She said, perhaps, but it was not love like this. They asked her if she had promised marriage. She said, he may have believed it. I do not know. They asked her about Culpeper. She paused. Too long. They asked again. She said, he was kind. I saw him once, maybe twice, alone. They pressed harder, and finally, she said, we spoke, nothing more, but if that was wrong, then I was wrong. It wasn't enough. It never is. The king did not respond to her letters. He read them, kept them, burned them, or perhaps, tucked them away in a drawer he never opened again. No one knows. All that's certain is that Catherine never saw him again. Not his face, not his hand, not even his shadow. She was no longer Rose. No longer sweetheart. No longer anything but a line in a council record. The investigation widened. Servants were arrested, questioned. Men, women, pages, chambermaids. Those who had once laughed with her were now writing statements. Names filled pages, some written in neat ink, some stained with tears, some with blood. Francis Dereham was taken first. He denied nothing. He spoke boldly, defiantly, and he was condemned, not for what he did, but for what he remembered. Culpeper came next. He was less defiant, more careful. He claimed innocence, insisted on dignity, but one glance at Catherine had cost him his life. He must have known. Their sentences were carried out quickly, not in the quiet of dawn, but with the sound of drums. In the square, before a crowd. Culpeper, beheaded. Dereham, punished more severely. Their names erased shortly after. Their faces never drawn. Their families silenced. Their stories buried. Catherine was told, gently. She did not cry. Not at first. She sat still, her hands folded in her lap. She whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for the boy she used to know, the one who had given her letters, not chains. And then she asked, will I see the king? The answer was no. She nodded, and turned her face to the wall. The council debated. Weeks passed. Some argued she was too young, too naive, too uneducated, that her actions were foolishness, not treason. But others disagreed. They said, she was queen. She knew her duty. She failed, and failure, in royal hands, is not just a mistake. It is betrayal, even if the betrayal was only a glance, a word, a heartbeat. In the end, they made a decision. She would be condemned by Act of Parliament. No trial, no defense, just words, written into law, and once signed, her fate would follow. She was moved to the Tower of London. By barge, at night, no procession, no songs, only the sound of water, lapping against stone, and a girl, wrapped in velvet that did not keep out the cold. They placed her in the same rooms Anne Boleyn had once slept in. The same bed, the same windows, the same path to the same place. But Catherine did not speak of Anne. She did not mention her cousin. She simply folded her hands and waited. The letter had broken everything. But not her, not yet. There was still time, still a sliver of silence where hope could sit, still a space between verdict and axe, still the chance that mercy would arrive. But mercy had left the palace long ago, and no one had noticed. The Tower of London had welcomed queens before, not with flowers, not with cheers, but with silence, thick, wet silence, the kind that gathers in corners and never leaves. Catherine arrived by water, late at night, wrapped in a cloak too fine for the place she now entered. She looked up at the arch of the gate. It was said her cousin had done the same. Anne Boleyn, dead before Catherine had even grown breasts. And now, here she was, walking into the same walls, sleeping beneath the same roof, and waiting for the same end. She had not eaten, she had not spoken much. Her ladies stayed close, too close, whispering prayers, as if they might soften the stones around them. But the tower does not soften. It remembers. The first night, Catherine asked, "May I see him?" They said no. She asked again, "Please, let me speak to the king. One moment, one chance." They looked away. They said it was impossible. She did not scream, not yet. She waited. The next day, she tried something else. She asked to go to chapel. They hesitated, then allowed it. A small kindness, or a cruel trick. She believed it was real. She dressed carefully, not in mourning black, not in royal gold, but in white, a color of peace, a color of surrender. She walked the narrow corridors barefoot. She held no letter, no gift, only a hope, a fragile thing, held between her ribs like a last breath. The chapel was cold, but quiet. Candlelight flickered across warm stone. Catherine knelt, whispered prayers, not grand, just small, intimate, like a girl asking not to be sent away from home. She asked for mercy, not absolution, not vengeance, just mercy, a word that had once meant something. She rose, walked to the door, and waited. She believed he would come. That Henry, the man who had called her his rose, would walk through that door. That he would see her, remember her, that his heart would stir, even slightly, and that he would speak, or look, or not walk away. She waited for a long time, then longer, longer still, but no one came, only footsteps behind her, 2 guards. They bowed their heads, and said, "It is time to return, Your Grace." She did not move. She placed her hand on the door. It was heavy, cold, unmoving. She knocked, softly at first, then harder, and then, she called out. Not a cry, not a scream, just a name, Henry. Silence. Then again, "Please," and again, "My lord." Her voice cracked, not from volume, but from something deeper, something hollowing out from within. She fell to her knees, begged, not like a queen, not like a woman, but like a girl who still believed someone might listen. She sobbed, not because of the axe, but because she had been erased, and she had not yet learned how to be invisible. The guards took her arms. Gently, not with violence, but with duty, they led her away, down the corridor, past the flickering torches, and she did not look back, because she had learned that doors in this palace do not open. Not for the young, not for the lovely, not for the forgotten. That night, she did not sleep. She paced, she wrote nothing, said little, but once, one of her ladies heard her murmur, He loved me once. Then again, he looked at me once. As if that memory could hold back the darkness. But the tower holds no memory. Only stone. The next morning, a priest came. He offered prayers. A small wafer. A psalm. She accepted them. She asked him, "Do you think he regrets it?" He said nothing, because sometimes silence is kinder than lies. Days passed. The sentence was read aloud in Parliament. Not with drama, just procedure. Her name, her crime, her fate, written in ink, sealed with wax. And with that, the girl who once filled the palace with laughter became a line in history. But in the tower, she was still Catherine, still breathing, still waiting, still wondering what she had done that was so unforgivable, that no one would say goodbye. The day they took away her crown, the world outside kept moving. The sun still rose. The bells still chimed. The birds still sang in the bare trees just outside the tower walls. But inside, time had slowed, stretched thin, as if waiting, as if holding its breath. And in the quiet heart of it all, Catherine Howard sat by a window she couldn't open, and tried to remember the sound of her own laughter. She had once been queen. She had once worn pearls so heavy they gave her a headache. She had once smiled from a gilded balcony while the people below shouted her name. She had once kissed the hand of a king and believed, for a moment, that perhaps this was a kind of love. But now, she was not even called Your Grace. Just Catherine, softly, almost apologetically, as though saying her name too loudly might make her real again. There had been no trial. Only parchment. Only names spoken in rooms she was not allowed to enter. They called it an act of attainder, a law written not to protect, but to erase. It said she had committed high treason. It said she had betrayed the king's trust. It said she had forfeited her right to mercy, to freedom, to life. It said she was guilty, but it never asked her to speak. The men who signed it wore red and black robes. They sat in stiff chairs. Their fingers inked. Their hearts, maybe not cold, but quiet. Too quiet. Because this was not their first time signing away a queen. And it would not be the last. Back in the tower, Catherine was not told all at once. The news came slowly, in glances, in the way her food arrived later than usual, in the way her ladies were dismissed one by one, in the way the priest stopped reading the psalms out loud. She began to understand, and when the confirmation came, when a guard she had never seen before read the official sentence in a voice more tremulous than hers, she simply nodded, as if she had already heard it in a dream. They asked if she needed anything. She said, "A pen, and a clean page." She spent most of that day writing. The page was neat, deliberate, no corrections, no embellishments. She did not write of guilt or innocence, only memory. She wrote about the roses in the garden at Hampton Court, the way their petals looked in summer. She wrote about her cousin Anne, though she never said her name. Only, the one who came before me. She wrote about laughter in the corridors, about music in the long gallery. And at the end, she wrote a single line. "If I was loved, then I was not wasted." Then she folded the page, pressed her palm against it, and handed it to the priest. That evening, the room grew colder, the wind pushed through the tower walls, and Catherine asked for something no queen had ever asked before. "May I practice?" The priest blinked, confused. "Practice what, my lady?" She looked at the floor, then said softly, "My head, upon the block." They brought her a low stool. Not the real one, just wood, just a shape, but it would do. She knelt, hands in her lap, breath steady, lowered her head, paused, lifted it again, and repeated the motion 4 times, 5 more, until she could do it without flinching, without weeping, without forgetting who she was. She asked her remaining lady to tie her hair, not in an elaborate braid, just tight enough that it wouldn't fall forward. She asked her to pick out a dress, white, unadorned. She wanted to look clean, clear, not like a queen, not like a criminal, just like herself. When the night deepened, she sat in her chair, back straight, eyes unfocused. The candle beside her flickered. She did not sleep, but she did not tremble. Once or twice, she hummed a small tune, nothing royal, just something soft from her childhood. The kind of melody sung by nursemaids when the world outside was too loud. The guards came at dawn. They did not speak, but they bowed, out of habit, or guilt, or both. Catherine rose slowly, not with drama, but with the composure of someone who has already said goodbye to herself. She looked around the room one last time. It was bare. It had always been bare, except for the weight of memory, and she carried that weight easily now. She walked the corridor quietly. No chains, no ropes, only footsteps. Hers, and theirs, and the memory of others who had walked here before. When they reached the door to the courtyard, she paused, looked up at the sky. It was grey, not stormy, just soft, like ash spread thin. She smiled, not because she was happy, but because smiling was the only armor she had left. Then she whispered, "I am ready," and stepped into the light. There is something strange about a night when you know the morning will never come for you. Not really. You might see the sun. You might hear the bells. But you will not walk out of the shadow you went to sleep in. Catherine Howard understood this, and she did not fight it. Not anymore. The tower had grown quieter, as if it too was preparing. The guards spoke less. The priest stayed longer. Even the rats seemed to keep their distance. There was a stillness that reached through the stone and sat gently beside her. Not heavy, not cruel, just there, like a second presence. Not death, but the awareness of it. She asked for candlelight, only candlelight. No torches, no fire, just one small flame. She placed it by the window and sat next to it on the floor. Her back against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees. She did not cry. She had done that already. She had cried when they shut the chapel doors. She had cried when they sent away her last maid. She had cried when they took her pearls. But tonight, she had no more tears. Only space. And memory. She remembered her first dance at court. The way the fabric of her gown whispered when she moved. She remembered the king's face, not angry, not cruel, but tired. Almost kind. She remembered laughter, roses, a letter hidden in a book, a song sung badly by a boy who blushed too much. She remembered being loved, or thinking she was, which, in the end, is sometimes the same thing. She asked for paper, wrote one final note. We do not know what it said. No one ever found it. Some say it was burned. Others say it was buried with her. But one of the guards, years later, said he saw her fold it 3 times. Then kiss it. Then place it under the candle. She said, "This is not for history. This is just for silence." As the night deepened, the wind picked up outside. She wrapped herself in a blanket. Not out of cold, but to feel something close. Something warm, even if it was borrowed. Even if it was fading. The priest returned one last time. He gave her communion. She thanked him, not as a queen, not as a prisoner, but as a girl. She said, "Will you pray for me?" He said, "I already have." She smiled, not because it helped, but because it was kind. And kindness, on a night like this, was everything. They offered her something to drink. She declined. They offered her a book. She declined. They offered her company. She declined. She said, "Let me be still now." And they listened. At some point, perhaps just before the candle went out, she whispered, "I am not afraid." And then, "But I am sorry." Not to the king, not to the court, to herself, to the girl she had once been. The one who had danced too freely, laughed too loudly, trusted too easily. She said, "I am sorry, I did not know." And then she was quiet. She did not sleep, not deeply, but she closed her eyes, and rested her head against the wall, and let the flame beside her flicker. Just a little longer. Outside, the scaffold had already been raised. The axe already oiled, the straw already laid down. But inside, the world had gone very still. And when the candle finally dimmed, and the stars outside faded into the soft grey of dawn. Catherine Howard opened her eyes and whispered her final line. "I die a queen, but I was always just a girl." The morning came slowly. Grey light slid across the floor of the tower. The walls were damp, the air cold, not from wind, but from the kind of stillness that lives in old stone. The guards arrived quietly. They did not knock. They did not speak. They stood just outside the room and waited. Catherine knew they were there. She had known before she even opened her eyes. Because when the body knows it will die, it listens differently, to the air, to the silence, to everything that does not want to be heard. She rose slowly, washed her face in cold water, brushed her hair, tied it back herself. No mirror, just instinct. Her hands were steady, her shoulders straight, her breathing soft and even. They brought her a gown. White, simple. She smiled when she saw it. She said, "Thank you, this will do." She put it on with care. Fastened each hook, smoothed each crease. It was not for vanity. It was for dignity, and she wanted to look whole. Even at the end, a priest waited by the door. He looked down when she approached. She reached for his hand, squeezed it, and said, "You have been very kind to me." He did not answer, but his lips moved in silent prayer. She stepped outside. The yard was already filled. Not with people, but with expectation, with the weight of what was about to happen. It had rained earlier. The ground was damp. The straw at the scaffold was flattened from the wind. And the block stood quiet, like a sentence not yet spoken. She walked without help, her head high, her steps slow, not for drama, but because every step now was the last of its kind. The last time her feet would touch earth. The last time her eyes would meet morning. The last time silence would carry her name. She climbed the scaffold without faltering. The wind pulled at her gown. The sky hung low and heavy. She turned to the crowd, not large, not loud, and said, "I die a queen, but I ask you to see me now not as a title, but as a girl who once danced, who once sang, and who once believed in love." Then she turned to the priest, knelt beside the block, and whispered her prayer. She placed her hands where they told her. Folded, still, she lowered her head, not with panic, not with defiance, but with the precision of someone who had practiced, who had made peace, who had let go. The executioner hesitated. Just a moment. She whispered, "I am ready," and in that breath, she became more than a queen. She became memory. The axe fell, once, clean, quick. The wind did not stop. The birds did not cry out. The sky did not open. But something in the courtyard changed. An echo left behind, a quiet shape in the space where she had stood. Not a scream, not a ghost, just an absence that would linger, longer than any crown. They buried her in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, a small place, unmarked, beside others, forgotten by many, but not by stone, not by silence, and not by those who still whisper her name at twilight. Catherine Howard died young, too young to understand the rules, too young to survive them, but not too young to be remembered, and not too small to carry a crown, even for a little while. There is no grand tomb for Catherine Howard, no golden effigy, no marble statue in the sunlight, just a name, sometimes forgotten, sometimes misspelled, sometimes not written at all. She lies beneath the floor of a small chapel in the Tower of London. No crown, no jewels, only stone, and silence. But the silence remembers. She was queen for less than 2 years. Too short to shape a kingdom. Too short to be immortalized in paintings. Too short to be properly hated, or truly mourned, but long enough to be watched, judged, erased, and eventually rediscovered. For a time, her name was spoken only in whispers. Catherine Howard, the foolish one, the pretty one, the one who danced too freely, the one who thought love was enough. History did not know what to do with her, so it looked away, let dust settle, let the record fade. But memory is stubborn. It stays in stone, in corridors, in portraits with no names, in stories told at fireplaces and schoolrooms and tourist walks that end with, "Here once walked a girl who didn't know she'd stepped into history." Catherine was not a villain, nor a heroine. She was human, confused, lonely, loved, maybe, used, certainly, beautiful, but not because of her face, because of the way she tried, until the end, to be more than what the world allowed her to be. She never ruled, never commanded armies, never changed laws, but she changed something quieter. She made people ask questions. What does it mean to be too young to understand love? What does it mean to be held responsible for feelings you were never taught to handle? What happens when a girl becomes a queen, but no one teaches her how to survive? They say she whispered something before she died, that she wished she had died the wife of Thomas Culpeper, or that she forgave the king, or that she said nothing at all. No one knows for certain, because history blurs what it cannot bear to see clearly. But this much is known: she walked to her death with dignity. She knelt. She whispered a prayer. She did not fight. She did not beg. She simply let go. And so now, if you remember her, let it not be for the scandal, or the axe, or the shame. Let it be for the girl who once danced barefoot in a forgotten chamber, who once believed music could keep her safe, who once asked to practice placing her head on the block, just so she wouldn't look afraid. Let her memory be soft. Let it be quiet. Let it be held not in judgment, but in peace, because in the end, that is what she asked for. Not justice, not pity, just peace. And now that her story is told, let her rest.